Most South Africans are raised to refer to someone older than them with some sort of a prefix. In Xhosa, you would refer to an older woman as umama and an older man as utata. Usisi and ubuti would be used to address a younger woman and a younger man. These words respectively would mean mother, father, sister, and brother. With my English friends, I always referred to their moms and dads as auntie so-and-so and uncle so-and-so if we had a close relationship. In the event that I wasn't as informal with their parents, I would call them Mrs. and Mr. so-and-so. When I started learning Afrikaans, I was taught that someone older than you or not related to you was then referred to as meneer in the case of a man, and oom could be used in the event that you had a less formal relationship with the person in question. Mevrou and mejuffrou correspond to the English terms of Mrs. and Miss that we use for women, and again, for less formal relationships, one could refer to an elderly woman as tannie. What you never did in Afrikaans was to use the term jy, the informal term that corresponds to you, for an elder, a stranger, or for your parents. Using jy in Afrikaans for an elderly person or someone that you didn't quite well know was considered disrespectful. Jy was only used among equals, among friends, family, and colleagues that had a special understanding with each other. U was the more adequate term to indicate respect, mostly used in formal settings and when referring to God. Otherwise, the proper pronouns mama, papa, mevrou, en mejuffrou, or en meneer would suffice. And so you can imagine the predicament that I found myself in when I started to visit the homes of some of my white friends during school and even at university. The setup was as follows. The domestic worker in the house was old enough to be my mother or even my grandmother, and I would walk into the house and greet her with molo mama, because that was how I was raised. And my friend would greet her with a, hello Florence, Priscilla, Cynthia. Essentially, they were on first name basis. In requests for said domestic worker to bring something or make lunch, it was always the pronoun jy. It became awkward at a stage for me to see someone who looked like me and was 3 or 4 times my senior not being referred to with the same respect that my friends and their parents would otherwise have afforded to another individual of the same age group if they were not a maid and if they were not a person of color. It began to dawn on me that I was taught to speak a language foreign to me with respect for its speakers, but that respect was never to be extended to people that looked like me. We could only ever be jy. And so you see, members of this convocation, that although this is a small example, it is in such ways that we are able to subtly use language to exercise power over people. Dat ons nie vir ander mense die respek gee wat ons eie taal vir ons leer om te doen nie, wys vir my dat waar ons die geleentheid het, sal ons taal gebruik om mag oor ander mense uit te oefen. Dames en here, lede van die IS Convocatie, goeienaand. Toe ek verlede jaar die uitnodiging ontvang het om hierdie toespraak te lewer, was ek redelik onseker oor wat ek moet sê. Die waarheid is dat die Stellenbosch van 2010 tot 2012, my eerste tydperkie, is baie anders as vandag se Stellenbosch. Dit voel vir my dat so baie het verander, maar ook dat so baie dieselfde gebly het. And so for this reason, I've decided to keep my address within the bounds of honest reflection, painful truths, and a hopeful outlook. I do not take for granted the fact that I'm the first woman, the first black person, and the youngest person to address some of South Africa's most powerful white people at this convocation today. When I look back on 2015 and the last 26 days of 2016, I'm reminded again that it has been an incredible time in South Africa in which our social consciousness has been stretched, awakened, challenged, and perhaps even tampered with. Who of us would have thought that while we were making our resolutions in January 2015, that somehow Rhodes would have been given the timeout signal at the University of Cape Town? Who among us saw it coming that Stellenbosch would be subpoenaed by its very own students, demanding that the ancient doors of education finally be made open to all South African citizens? Which of us can say that we foresaw the eruptions of unapologetic black consciousness at what is currently known as Rhodes University and Wits University, while we were planning to start banting and lose 20 kilograms last year? Did any of us think that we would all serve as witnesses to Emmanuel Sitole's brutal murder, the Mozambican man whose only crime was perhaps to have lost in the lottery of citizenship and make his way over the border into an unwelcoming Johannesburg? How could we have known that in the supposed attempts to manage the situation, some of the members of our police force would laugh and giggle while foreigners sizzled in rubber rings on the streets of Durban? I'm quite sure that none of us saw Fees Must Fall coming, or the macabre images of students being shot at and tear-gassed at Parliament, the supposed home of our democracy. Indeed, almost 22 years into democracy, in the 60th year since the Freedom Charter's adoption and just 6 months before the 40th anniversary of the 1976 Soweto uprisings, South Africans are now faced with the task of looking into the mirror and asking themselves, what is this that is happening all around us, and why does it feel the way it feels? The problem, however, is that there are perhaps 60 million different versions of this question being asked, and in more than 11 languages. It may seem as though only some of these voices are being heard, but it is becoming clear that the Rainbow Nation ideal promised to us in 1994 is becoming an ever-distant one. Perhaps we are realizing that there was no rainbow to start with. Ladies and gentlemen, something is brewing in South Africa. I don't know the name of that something, but I know that it is irreversible and will continue to brew and boil over whether we give it the permission to do so or not. Without sounding like a prophet of doom, I bring your attention to the title of my speech as it stands in the program. It is entitled, Courage, Compassion and Complexity, Reflections on the New Matieland and the New South Africa. Tonight, however, it is difficult for me to talk about courage or compassion. Sorry. Okay. I'm painfully reflecting on the new Stellenbosch and the new South Africa, and I'm cautiously and ashamedly questioning what is significantly new about these two establishments. I've struggled through a number of personal conflicts over the last year. Thank you. I've struggled through a lot of personal conflicts over the last year, and I can only speak from the point of the thought processes that I'm undergoing as a South African youth. I will firstly say that we owe it to ourselves as South Africans to be honest and vulnerable with each other. In her October 2015 article entitled Conservative Backlash Comes from Unexpected Quarters, Sisonke Msimang writes the following: there should be nothing we cannot discuss in a democracy that so many people died to produce. Indeed, the primary contribution of this new generation of activists to the future must involve raucous debates about the Constitution and the utility of some of its clauses in a still unequal society. Instead of adopting a sneering tone, those who fought for freedom ought to be grateful that post-apartheid citizens are insisting on honest racial dialogue. Those who claim to be committed to democracy must be pleased that new voices are questioning the faulty economic approaches the country has taken thus far. End of quote. In the wake of the ugly racial, political, and economic debates happening in South Africa, I can tell you as a young person that there is a new generation of South Africans, especially South Africans of color, who are proud and have no interest or tolerance for the things that their parents let slide as we entered the democratic dispensation. In essence, this means that as we define and redefine our identities, and as we define the new South Africa that we want our identities to manifest in, we have created no room for capitalists without a conscience, no room for racists, patriarchs, misogynists, homophobes, ageist, or ableist. The inappropriately labeled born frees are saying that we will employ an intersectional feminism that squarely confronts the systems of oppression that neither the TRC nor the current South African Constitution has been able to sufficiently address. The kinds of young South Africans that I have encountered in the last while are unapologetic and no longer interested in mollycoddling fragile egos or catching feelings. What our schools and our universities have refused to teach us and include in our curriculums, we have gone out and taught ourselves. This means that in our conceptualizations of new and old, in our understanding that our ancestors were in fact not savages, that they did in fact write their own philosophies about life and society, as William Qoba, that our fathers and forefathers did in fact have a religion of love and justice and mercy, captured in the holiest and purest form of Ubuntu, before Europeans arrived with Bibles in one hand and guns in the other, other, in our understanding that our ancestors were not only good enough for slavery, we are becoming clearer and clearer in our intent that that which came with the old system must be dismantled in order to truly say we are living, or at least building towards, a more equitable and humane South African society. The real issue is that in this democratic moment in South Africa, each of us with our diverse interests, agendas, and privileges have a very clear decision to make. Do we want to be part of the new South Africa? Do we think that Stellenbosch is part of South Africa? Because in as much as we want to insulate ourselves in this little Europe, we must be very clear that Stellenbosch is not exempt from the winds of change that are blowing through this country. Stellenbosch is in fact part of the Republic of South Africa, for those who have forgotten. And Stellenbosch is responsible for a lot of the inequalities that this same republic continues to face today. Sometimes I think that when we talk about this beautiful institution, we forget that the actual academic thesis for apartheid was casually written in black and white just down the road in the sociology department of this university. Today, I'm standing in what was called the D.F. Malan Centrum when I was a student. And I graduated with beautiful results in 2012. When I walked across this stage, I've never been so happy in my life to have a white man tap me on my head. But the reality is that D.F. Malan, the man after whom this building was named, would not have wanted me here. To D.F. Malan, I was only good enough to be a slave. Yet here I stand with a Master's in Peace and Conflict Studies, cum laude. When the Verwoerd plaque... Thank you. When the Verwoerd plaque in Dagbreek came down last year, I couldn't believe the levels of outrage that some people expressed at its removal, as though there was any good thing to his thoughts about humanity. The truth is that, unfortunately, white South Africans will never understand what the experience of racism really means. It's not just about being called a monkey by a sparrow. It's not just about being told that you are, quote, a messed up race that opens its legs just to get a child grant, as Mari van Rensburg brazenly claimed a few days ago. It is a daily psychological violence that manifests in every single area of our lives. It manifests in our religion and the way that we perceive ourselves. It manifests in our economy, it manifests in politics, and it even infiltrates our education. So unfortunately, white people will never understand what it is like to be taught the history of your own people, not in your language, in a building named after a man that thought you were intellectually and scientifically inferior to his own. To be studying at a school or to have a degree from an institution literally built on the labor, the suffering, and the land of your own people, and then be confronted with that every single day is a distasteful experience. This is not something that we were supposed to simply get over in 1994. So the reality is that a system that was racist, patriarchal, and unconscionable in its capitalism on the 26th of April before the vote did not magically change on the 28th of April after the vote. And this is why we are still having the same conversations in South Africa that we should have had back then. A recent tweet from Kaya Dlanga captured this perfectly. While I deeply respect and honor the legacy of Nelson Mandela, one of the greatest mistakes I believe he and his comrades made was to tell their people to, I quote, forgive before an apology was offered. In South Africa, contrary to other normal peace processes in the world, forgiveness was given before the crime was acknowledged by the perpetrators, end of quote. The TRC was supposed to deal with our issues of unforgiveness and our lack of reconciliation, but the evidence of the last few months and the last year is contrary, and people are not interested in having their anger policed or curated. The problem, I think, is that in South Africa, we are not 100% convinced that our past was unjust. Unlike the Germans, who are genuinely sorry, barring the right-wing neo-Nazis, as a country, Germany is so embarrassed by their history that Nazism and public glorifications of Adolf Hitler are criminalized. There is no in-between that maybe some parts of Nazi Germany were nice and other parts were not. Germans have outrightly written that part of their history off as unequivocally bad. In South Africa, we do not have a consensus that plus minus 400 years of colonialism and 52 years of apartheid was an affirmative action for white people at its best. Today, we still debate the legacy of Rhodes, and not all of us agree that our history was in no way, by any measure, pretty, because you still hear people today talking about die goeie ou dae. Ons land, dames en here, is in groot moeilikheid. En Stellenbosch is in groot moeilikheid, maar nie as gevolg van die tradisionele swart gevaar nie, of as gevolg van die kanker van Engels nie. Ons is in die moeilikheid want ons het komplekse probleme wat ons moet aanspreek, en dit benodig 'n heel ander vlak van moedigheid en dapperheid om die spooke van ons lelike geskiedenis aan te spreek. I realize that at the moment, many of my white friends are struggling to find and even articulate what their place and the role in the new South Africa is or should be. And I realize for sure that our government has not been faithful to its commitments after 1994. We have an epic crisis of leadership in this country and good governance, and it will take a concerted effort by every single individual in this country to hold our politicians accountable. However, I want to be clear that nothing we are experiencing and feeling is happening in isolation from what we see manifesting on a national level. We as a nation are the sum total of our experiences. I want to say that again. We as a nation are the sum total of our experiences. We are a mess, and we must acknowledge that mess. We cannot attempt to erase the mess that we are from our social consciousness. When we choose not to listen and extend practical compassion to the most marginalized amongst us, we do our own narrative as a nation the greatest disservice. Without compassion in this country, we will not survive the current tumultuous times that we are in. Practically, this means that 2016 is the year that white South Africans must take the back seat and must listen in conversations about race, power, and privilege. Black South Africans had to give forgiveness in 1994 simply to get a vote. In 2016, if Black South Africans are to continue with that mantra, it must be reciprocated with compassion and active forms of retribution. No matter what our individual sentiments, South African women of color got the shortest end of the stick in the negotiated settlement, and it is evident that their children are coming back for a refund. Soos ek voor hierdie konvokasie staan, besef ek dat daar's mense wat sal voel ek is anti-wit, ek is rassisties en dat ek meld myself aan asof ek al die antwoorde het vir Suid-Afrika se probleme. Maar ek wil graag hê dat u sal mooi luister vir dit wat ek sê. Vir die van ons wat vasglo dat my gedagtes en my perspektiewe is 'n aanval teen Afrikaans en teen wit Suid-Afrikaners, wil ek dit baie duidelik maak dat ek het geen belangstelling om teen enige rasgroep of taalgroep te staan nie. Wat ek wel glo, is dat ons moet altyd eerlik met mekaar wees in sulke gesprekke oor ons land, ons universiteite en die toekoms waarheen ons gaan. Die koei in die bos, wat ek glo Prof. Breitenbach nog gaan aanspreek, is hierdie kwessie van taal. Die ding met taal en hoe ons dit gebruik, is dat dit is nooit neutraal nie. Veral in die konteks van Stellenbosch en Suid-Afrika, taal is net so persoonlik soos wat dit polities is. Vir my is dit baie belangrik om te erken dat die US 'n Suid-Afrikaanse universiteit is. Dit behoort aan alle Suid-Afrikaners en nie aan een groep nie. To be part of this country, the underlying thesis that we have all implicitly accepted is that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. And unless we want to have another CODESA, or we cannot now start to delineate and decide who gets to study where on the basis of what language. Tweedens wil ek vinnig praat oor hierdie kwessie van die beskerming van 'n taal. Soos jy kan hoor, praat ek baie mooi Afrikaans. Ek is nie 'n Afrikaner nie en ek het nie Afrikaans op Stellenbosch geleer nie. Maar ek is baie lief vir die taal. Vir my is daar woorde en gevoelens wat ek nie beter kan beskryf in 'n ander taal nie. Maar ek dink die primêre funksie van 'n universiteit is nie noodwendig om 'n taal of 'n kultuur te beskerm nie, maar eintlik om hoër onderwys te voorsien vir die dogters en seuns van ons land. Waar hierdie aksie nou toegang tot opvoeding vir alle Suid-Afrikaanse studente begin beperk, deur middel van taal, moet ons dan herëvalueer of die universiteit eintlik sy werk doen of nie. Afrikaans gaan nie sommer sterf nie, as dit nie meer die hooftaal van onderrig in ons klasse is nie. Vra net vir mense wat nog steeds hulle taal praat sonder 'n universiteit. Laastens wil ek oor die taal self praat, ek is amper klaar. Die groot vraag hier is, aan wie behoort Afrikaans? Die eenvoudige antwoord is dat Afrikaans behoort aan Afrikaners. But who owns Afrikaans? The Kaapse Klopse, with their Guma music, should also rightfully own Afrikaans. The people of District 6 and the Boerkaap should rightfully also own Afrikaans. The face of Afrikaans at our university and in South Africa should not and cannot be only the face of a white man, but also the face of colored Afrikaans women and black Afrikaans women, because these people exist as well. Colored Afrikaans women and black Afrikaans women exist too, no matter how much we deny them access to our university. So, we must stop this thing of using colored and black Afrikaans people who are currently dispossessed as our cleaners and our farm workers as an excuse for exclusionary policies and practices. The very act of using them in such a way is exploitative in nature, because we know that their children will never make it to Stellenbosch University as it is. But even if their children do get here, they will arrive and they will see an Afrikaans language and culture defended in their own name that they have no part of. Die grote waarheid is dat Afrikaans is baie tale. Dit is verskillende kulture. Ons moet erken dat Afrikaans is in ons eie geskiedenis en selfs vandag baie keer gebruik teen mense wat nie wit is nie. As ons vir 'n Afrikaanse universiteit wil verdedig, dan moet ons aanvaar dat dit behels onder andere 'n verdediging van Afrikaaps, Swartlands Afrikaans, Bolands Afrikaans, Oeverbergs Afrikaans, Weskus Sandvelds Afrikaans, Karoo Afrikaans, Ooskaps Afrikaans, Oranje Rivier en Gariepsdams Afrikaans, Boesmanslands Afrikaans, Grieko-Afrikaans, Namakwalands Afrikaans en Richtevelds Afrikaans. En dan moet ons erken dat die gesig daarvan is meestal nie die gesig van 'n wit Afrikaner man nie. Ons moet erken, Ons moet erken dat baie min mense is verbind tot die beskerming van alle forme en alle gesigte van Afrikaans in die nuwe Suid-Afrika. Ons moet ook erken en herken dat die ontwikkeling en onderhoud van Afrikaans as 'n akademiese taal, as 'n kultuur en as 'n magtige ekonomiese en sosiale gereedskap was nog nooit bedoel of bestem om 'n nie-wit bevolking te beskerm nie. Dis kan die teenwoordigheid van 'n Afrikaans sprekende kleurlingpopulasie nie gebruik word as 'n rede om eers te behou soos wat dit nou is, net omdat dit gemaklik is in hierdie gesprek. Dit wys dat ons net belangstelling in kleurling en swart studente het, wanneer dit die doeleindes van 'n wit Afrikaanse agenda pas. En dit, dames en here, is baie oneerlik. On this note, I want to end my speech by saying that we have a choice as South Africans to reclaim our humanity. Both apartheid and colonization dehumanized us all by giving white people a superiority complex and giving black people an inferiority complex, albeit with different consequences. We were all dehumanized, and we must dismantle this inhumanity that we are all products of by reclaiming our collective humanity. We must reclaim our histories so that both of our children will know exactly the truth about themselves. We must reclaim our languages so that those who choose to speak our languages do so out of pure love, like I speak Afrikaans, and not out of obligation. I look forward to the day when I do not have to talk to my children about racism or sexism. That is really my dream for South Africa and Africa as a whole. But for us to get to that point where we never talk about racism and sexism again, we need to know that the roles we need to play. Those who must listen must listen. Those who need the chance to cry must be allowed to cry. Those who need to be angry must be allowed to be angry. Those who need to talk must be allowed to talk. But none of us gets to claim an easy victory, because there is no victory in our collective pain. There is only closure, and South Africa desperately needs closure. Thank you.